In the quiet fields of rural Colorado, where morning mist clings to crops and silence speaks louder than gossip, one man's farm became the front line of a war he never asked for. Caleb Harper thought his biggest worry would be frostbite or drought. But when the water stopped flowing, when the well ran dry in the middle of harvest, he knew something wasn't just wrong, it was stolen. What began as a slow trickle of suspicion turned into a flood of betrayal, entitlement, and revenge. And as the truth unraveled, Caleb would discover that sometimes the fiercest battles don't happen in courtrooms or with fists, but in the dirt, under the sun, and with a whole town watching. It started with a crack in the morning silence. The kind of silence you only get out in the country. Just the faint chirp of meadowlarks and the creak of sun-baked wood stretching awake. Caleb Morgan stood beside the barn, boots planted in dry dirt, staring at the bone-dry trickle of his irrigation ditch. No water. Again. The Texas sun was already beating down hard, and it wasn't even 8 a.m. Caleb wiped his brow with the back of his arm, dust smearing across sweat-streaked skin. He crouched by the ditch, scooping up a handful of the brittle soil. It crumbled like dead leaves in his hand. "Son of a," he muttered. For nearly 2 generations, the well on Morgan Acres had run strong. His father swore it was the best part of the land, deep, pure, and stubborn, just like the Morgans. Not even the drought of '98 had shut it down. But now, something was wrong, and Caleb had a gnawing feeling it wasn't Mother Nature's doing. His farm was suffering. Corn that had once stretched tall and proud now slumped in defeat. The cattle were getting meaner, hungrier, thirstier. The stress clawed at his chest every night, like he was losing something sacred, not just a farm, but a legacy. He had called Earl Simmons, the best damn plumber in the county and a man who never sugarcoated a thing. After 2 hours of scowling and cussing his way through the pump house and piping, Earl stood with his hands on his hips, squinting at the morning light. "Ain't no busted line, Caleb," Earl grumbled. "No leaks. Your well ain't running dry, it's being bled out." "Bled out?" Caleb asked, eyes narrowing. Earl nodded grimly. "Someone's helping themselves to your water." Caleb's heart sank. "You serious? I'd bet my last chew of tobacco on it. You got a thief, son." At first, Caleb thought it was crazy. Who the hell would steal water from a working farm? Then he remembered the koi pond. Veronica Hale, his neighbor, president of the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association, a woman with a perfectly symmetrical yard and a passion for control. She'd moved in 2 years ago, trading city life for her idea of rustic charm, without giving up a single luxury. From day one, she'd made it clear. She hated the messy look of Caleb's barn, the scent of livestock, and especially the crowing of his rooster at dawn. But it wasn't until last month that Caleb noticed something strange. Despite the city's strict watering restrictions and ongoing drought conditions, Veronica's yard looked like a magazine spread. Emerald grass, blazing floral beds, and a 3-tiered marble fountain that gushed like Niagara Falls. Her koi pond shimmered like glass, fed by a silent stream. Caleb had thought maybe she was hauling in water, some rich people thing. Now, he wasn't so sure. That night, after the sun dipped below the hills and the cicadas came out in chorus, Caleb slipped on his headlamp, grabbed a flashlight, and followed his water line like a detective tracing a crime scene. He moved slowly, his boots crunching dry gravel, heart thumping with each step. Near the back of his property, behind a thicket of mesquite and brush, he found it. A thin PVC line, freshly buried and snaking away from his main pipe. He followed it, each step a confirmation of the sinking suspicion. The pipe ran beneath the fence line, through a patch of recently disturbed soil, and ended right at Veronica's back gate. Her koi pond bubbled innocently just a few yards beyond. His jaw clenched. She had tapped into his well, illegally, quietly, with the boldness only someone drunk on entitlement could muster. For a moment, Caleb just stood there in the dark, staring at her palace of water-fed perfection, his farm dying by the day. his hands curled into fists. He had confronted droughts, disease, and debt, but he had never faced this neighborly theft. And from the president of the damn HOA, no less. He could have marched over there, demanded she shut it down. He could have yelled, but Veronica would twist the story, smile for the crowd, and spin him into the angry farmer trope. She had influence. She knew the bylaws. Caleb knew that fighting her the old-fashioned way wouldn't work. So he did what his father taught him. He got quiet. He got smart. The next morning, Caleb installed a set of motion-triggered cameras near the tap. He spent his evenings combing through footage, documenting every drop she stole. He built a folder of evidence, videos, timestamps, water pressure logs, photos. All of it neat, detailed, undeniable. And when the time came, he was going to make sure Veronica Hale paid in full. For every stolen gallon, every withered stalk of corn, every drop of sweat he'd lost under the cruel sun. Because Caleb Morgan wasn't just a farmer. He was a storm. And he was about to roll in. 2 days after Caleb uncovered the illegal pipe, the sheriff paid him a visit. Sheriff Beau Landry was a tall, sun-weathered man with the demeanor of someone who had seen too many small-town disputes turn ugly. He climbed out of his dusty Ford and approached Caleb with the slow stride of someone who wasn't in a hurry, but knew things were about to get complicated. "Caleb," he said, tipping his hat. "Got a minute?" Caleb wiped his hands on a rag, stepping out of the barn. "Sure. What's going on?" Beau looked uncomfortable. "Got a complaint from Ms. Hale. Says you've been intimidating her. Trespassing, taking pictures, messing with her property." Caleb blinked. "She say anything about the water she's been siphoning from my land?" The sheriff gave a tired sigh. "She says she's never touched your well. Claims she paid for a landscaping company that might have misconnected a pipe. Said you've been lurking near her fence, watching her yard, and it's making her feel unsafe." Caleb clenched his jaw. "You know me, Beau. I don't go looking for trouble." "I do," the sheriff said. "That's why I'm here. I also know Veronica's got friends on the county board. If you're planning on going after her, you better have more than just a hunch." "I've got more than that," Caleb said, pulling his phone from his pocket. He opened the video footage, crisp night vision showing the PVC line, the trench between properties, and the clear visual of Veronica's gardener connecting the pipe. Beau leaned in, eyes narrowing. "You get this legally?" "On my own property." Beau let out a low whistle. "Well, hell." "And that's not all," Caleb added. "Her koi pond's on a loop. There's no city water hookup, just the stolen line. I got a pressure log that matches her peak usage. When my well drops, her fountain sings." The sheriff scratched his chin. "This is gonna be messy." "She's been bleeding me dry for weeks, Beau. Crops are dying, my cattle are stressed, and she has the gall to report me?" "City council won't like this." "They're not supposed to like it," Caleb said. "They're supposed to enforce the law." Beau gave him a long, considering look. "All right. I'll file an official incident report. But don't expect the HOA or the council to back down easy. She's got influence, Caleb, and she's already 2 steps ahead of you in the politics game." "I don't need politics," Caleb replied, his voice calm but sharp. "I've got the truth, and a hell of a lot more patience than she does." The sheriff nodded. "Just keep it clean. I don't want this turning into one of those neighbor feuds that ends in barbed wire and lawsuits." But Caleb was already thinking beyond the sheriff's warnings. Because Veronica hadn't just trespassed. She'd underestimated him. And that was her biggest mistake. That same night, Caleb shut off the illegal connection. He didn't say a word, didn't warn her. He simply turned the valve and sealed the pipe. What once flowed like a river into her perfect lawn now dribbled into dust. The koi pond began to lower, slowly but steadily. Her fountain gurgled, then hissed, then fell silent. By dawn, the transformation was visible. Caleb, Sipping coffee on his porch, watched as Veronica came outside in a silk robe and sunglasses, holding a mimosa like a weapon. She strutted toward her koi pond, stopped short, and tilted her head. The water was down by at least 6 inches. She ran to the fountain next. Nothing. Not a drop. Caleb couldn't hear her cursing from that distance, but the frantic pacing and wild gesturing were enough to paint the picture. Half an hour later, her SUV peeled out of the driveway. She was going to the HOA office, probably to scream, maybe to cry, most definitely to lie. Caleb didn't flinch. He had already emailed the HOA board a neat, evidence-laden package the night before. Footage, logs, a notarized letter from Earl the plumber. No accusations, just facts. Let Veronica dance. He had the music. As the sun rose higher, Caleb walked his fields. The damage was done. Weeks of stunted growth, leaves curled from dehydration. Some rows he could salvage. Others, he'd have to rip up and replant. But this was bigger than just lost crops. It was about dignity. His family had poured generations of sweat into this land. He wasn't going to let a bored suburban queen tear it down because she wanted luxury in a drought. He had no political power, no wealthy friends, no HOA membership. But he had something Veronica didn't: roots. And when you plant yourself deep enough, not even the prettiest weed can choke you out. Veronica Hale wasn't the kind of woman who took defeat lying down. By the following Monday, the impact of Caleb's silent retaliation had already begun to echo through the neighborhood, but not in the way he'd hoped. A letter from the local HOA arrived, crisp and condescending, tucked in a heavy cream-colored envelope with embossed lettering that practically screamed, "You are the problem." Mr. Grant, we've received several complaints concerning unauthorized utility modifications and potential tampering with shared water infrastructure. You are hereby summoned to attend a compliance hearing. Caleb sat at his kitchen table, gripping the letter with a dry laugh. Shared water infrastructure? There was no such thing in a rural town like Twin Hollow. Everyone had their own wells, and his land wasn't even within the HOA's official bounds. He picked up the phone and called Sheriff Bowe. "She's using the HOA now," Caleb said bluntly. "Claims I'm stealing from a system that doesn't exist." Bowe let out a slow whistle on the other end. "She's pulling every string she's got." "Any chance I get out of this without a circus?" "Nope," the sheriff said. "But you bring that footage, your logs, and that plumber's affidavit. Hell, I'll write you a statement myself. You've got the law on your side." But Caleb, understand this. Veronica doesn't care about the law. She cares about narrative. And narrative, it turned out, was Veronica's favorite game. That week, flyers started showing up on community bulletin boards, printed in full color, glossy. The title read, "Water Justice. Stop the Bullies. Save Our Neighborhood." The flyer painted Caleb as a disgruntled outsider who was hoarding water resources while others suffered. It claimed that Veronica was an advocate for green sustainability, and that Caleb's actions were dangerous to the harmony of the community. It would have been laughable if people hadn't started believing it. The bakery owner, who used to wave at him every morning, now barely made eye contact. A neighbor who'd borrowed Caleb's tools just 2 months ago turned away when he passed on the road. Gossip had teeth, and Veronica was feeding it prime steak. At the town diner, Caleb overheard whispers. "I heard he shut off her water completely, out of spite." "Didn't he threaten someone before? I always thought he seemed intense." He went quiet, observant, gathering what he could, because the fight wasn't just about water anymore. It was about reputation, power, and control. Veronica was rich, polished, and well-connected. But Caleb had patience and truth. The HOA hearing took place in the back room of the Twin Hollow Community Center, beneath flickering fluorescent lights and a ceiling fan that hadn't worked since the Bush administration. Caleb showed up early, with a binder full of documentation and a USB drive of the footage. Veronica arrived fashionably late, dressed in a pastel blazer, heels that tapped the floor like a metronome, and a smirk that didn't budge when she saw Caleb sitting at the table. She brought her attorney, a slick, tan-skinned man with gelled hair, a Rolex, and the kind of handshake that made Caleb want to count his fingers afterward. The HOA board, 3 retirees, and a tired-looking part-time paralegal looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. But Veronica lit up the room like a stage. She flipped her hair, poured on the charm, and spoke like she was auditioning for a campaign ad. "All I've ever wanted is to live peacefully," she said with syrup in her voice, "to contribute to this lovely town. But some people seem to think sabotage is the same as justice." She accused Caleb of shutting down a shared resource, claimed he damaged her irrigation, and insinuated that his surveillance footage was staged. Her lawyer handed out copies of fake invoices, showing an installation error by a third-party landscaping company. They tried to claim the illegal pipe had been a mistake, a misunderstanding. When it was Caleb's turn, he said nothing at first. He plugged in the USB, played the footage. Silence. It was all there, clear as day. The unauthorized pipe, the connection, the water flow, and Veronica's landscaper taking orders from her, directly. Then he laid out his timeline, the pressure logs, the plumbing report, Bo's signed affidavit. He spoke with calm precision, no drama, no raised voice, just facts. When he was done, he looked directly at the board. "She didn't just steal water," he said quietly. "She risked my animals, my crops, my livelihood, and now she wants to paint me as the threat." There was a long pause. Veronica broke it with a scoff. "He's twisting this into a personal vendetta." The HOA chair leaned forward. "Ma'am, I think the video contradicts your version of events." Her attorney jumped in. "That footage may be taken out of context. We'd like time to investigate further." Caleb stood. "You had time. You used it to lie." The board didn't decide that day. They said it needed review. Caleb left the room not with a victory, but with something better. Doubt. Veronica's story had cracks now, and he was going to make sure every single one split wide open. Caleb didn't need to wait long for Veronica to strike back. 3 days after the hearing, his farm was vandalized. The eastern fence, where the fields met the road, had been slashed through. 2 water troughs were overturned, their contents spilled and wasted. His backup water tank had its spigot snapped off, flooding the dirt until it turned into a muddy crater. It was deliberate, precise, timed just before dawn. The worst part? His livestock had scattered. 2 calves were still missing by mid-morning. Caleb called the sheriff. Again. And when Bo showed up, he didn't even have to say it. "She's escalating." Caleb nodded grimly. "And this time, she's not hiding behind paperwork." Bo crouched beside the broken tank, eyeing the jagged edge of the valve. "This ain't an accident, but proving who did it." Caleb already knew. But knowing and proving were different beasts. He reviewed the camera footage from the past 48 hours. Oddly, the camera near the fence line had been tampered with. Lens smeared with something sticky. Vaseline, maybe. That meant whoever did this had planned it. Knew what to avoid. That wasn't the work of a bored teen. It was targeted. Veronica's fingerprints weren't on the crime, but her shadow was all over it. Still, Caleb didn't retaliate. Not directly. Instead, he doubled down on protecting his land, reinforced his fencing, installed 2 extra motion detectors, and quietly hired a private investigator from 2 counties over. Discreet, untraceable, thorough. He didn't need revenge, he needed receipts. But then, something unexpected happened. The townsfolk began to notice. The tide, slow and subtle, started to shift. It began with Miss Grady, the school librarian, who stopped Caleb outside the post office. "I saw what she posted online," she said quietly. "It didn't sit right with me, so I asked around." She gave him a small smile. "Turns out, a few others feel the same." Then it was Javi from the hardware store, who offered Caleb a discount for being the guy who's not full of BS. And finally, Ellie, a local vet tech and single mom who dropped by with fresh hay. My uncle lost his well during the drought last year, she said. I saw what she did to yours. I don't care what the HOA says, you're in the right. The support wasn't loud. It wasn't a mob with pitchforks. But it was steady, organic. And it made a difference. Because Veronica, she noticed. And it drove her nuts. She responded by throwing a 4th of July neighborhood block party, complete with fireworks, wine tastings, and a catered spread. She bragged about being entirely organic. She posted about it nonstop, invited everyone, except Caleb. The day of the party, Caleb sat on his porch watching her backyard fill up with guests. Laughter floated through the trees, mixing with music and the pop of champagne corks. But he wasn't angry. He was ready, because that morning, his private investigator had sent him something golden. A photo, time-stamped, clear as day. It showed one of Veronica's hired landscape contractors, under her direct supervision, tampering with the PVC pipe that linked into his well. Another photo showed a crate of koi pond pumps stacked in her garage, dated 2 weeks before she claimed she didn't even know about the connection. Caleb smiled. That night, while the party was still raging, he sent copies of the files, not just to the sheriff, but to the local news. By sunrise the next day, the email had already gone viral. A local news outlet, the Pine County Ledger, picked up the story. Their headline read, "Farmer alleges neighbor illegally tapped private well to feed luxury backyard during drought." It spread like wildfire across social media. Not just because of the crime, but because of who the accused was. Veronica Stanton, longtime HOA board member, former city council candidate, and self-proclaimed voice of responsible development, was now being accused of theft, water theft, in a state that had just come off the worst drought in a decade. By noon, Caleb's inbox was full of interview requests. His phone rang nonstop. But he didn't speak, yet. Instead, he let the footage speak for itself. The drone photos, the PVC piping, the receipts from the hardware store, dated and signed. And, most damning, the video of Veronica walking beside the trench, pointing at the connection being installed while sipping her green smoothie like a Roman empress. Even Pine Valley Mornings, the local public access show, ran a segment about Watergate in our own backyard. Veronica tried to spin it. She posted a long-winded Facebook status claiming Caleb had edited the footage, that she was a victim, that she was being harassed by an unhinged neighbor. It backfired. Dozens of comments poured in, many from people she had silenced, fined, or pushed out of neighborhood meetings over the years. You fined me $50 for a wind chime but stole water. Unreal. This woman once told my son he couldn't skateboard on his own driveway. I always knew something was off about her koi pond. Thanks for the confirmation, Caleb. The illusion of control? Gone. And Caleb? He was calm, patient. Because while Veronica spiraled, Caleb's attorney was filing a civil suit for trespassing, property damage, and theft of utility services. Estimated damages? Over $30,000, plus legal fees. The HOA, desperate to distance themselves, called an emergency session. Caleb was invited. So was Veronica. The meeting was tense, packed. Half the neighborhood showed up, many with arms crossed, lips pursed, waiting to see what would happen. Veronica, for once, looked rattled. Her usual pearls were replaced with a plain cardigan. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain her intentions. I was trying to preserve the value of our community, she stammered. The fountain, the pond, the landscaping, it was all for the neighborhood, aesthetic matters. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Then Caleb stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell. You stole from me, he said simply. Not for the neighborhood, for your image. While my crops died and my animals went thirsty, you were pumping stolen water into a koi pond. Silence. Then a single voice from the back, Javi from the hardware store. Yeah, And you charged me $200 for painting my shed too blue. Laughter. Applause. And just like that, the tide turned completely. The HOA board voted 5-0 to remove Veronica from her position effective immediately. Her influence? Shattered. Her allies? Silent. Her reputation? Burned to ash. That night, Caleb sat on his porch watching the stars, the soft hum of sprinklers finally back to normal across his land. His livestock were fed. His fields watered. Peace was beginning to return. But he knew this wasn't the end. Veronica might be down, but someone like her rarely stays buried for long. Still, for now, justice had arrived, and it tasted sweeter than the juiciest tomato from his back garden. The lawsuit settled quietly. Veronica Stanton, facing mounting legal fees, a brutal HOA fine, and a rapidly eroding reputation, agreed to pay damages. $27,450 to be exact. It wasn't just the cost of the stolen water. It was the price of trespassing, intentional damage to property, and the forced shutdown of Caleb's irrigation system during a critical season. She signed the agreement through gritted teeth, her once flawless signature now a shaky scrawl at the bottom of a settlement form that marked the end of her reign. She moved out a month later. No farewell party. No one came to help pack. The for sale sign in front of her once envied home stood untouched for weeks until a modest young family from Oregon bought it. They didn't want the koi pond. They wanted a vegetable garden. Fitting. Caleb Harper stood at the edge of his field the morning after the movers drove away, a thermos of black coffee warming his hands as the first golden rays of sun lit the tips of the cornrows. The sprinklers hummed softly, a gentle chorus of rebirth, soaking the soil evenly once again. His crops were recovering, so was he. He didn't feel victorious. He felt grounded. Winning had never been about revenge. It had always been about principle. The farm was more than land. It was his family's story. His grandfather dug the first well. His mother planted the first orchard. He had nearly lost that legacy to someone who thought entitlement outranked honesty. But not anymore. The change didn't stop with Veronica's exit. Her fall had cracked open years of silent frustration within the community. People who had been fined for petty violations, bullied in meetings, or excluded from decisions started speaking up. And Caleb, he was no longer just the quiet farmer with the stubborn rooster. He was now the man who stood up and won. The HOA board approached him a few weeks later, asking if he'd consider running for a seat. At first, he laughed. He'd rather muck a stall than attend meetings about mailbox colors. But then, he thought about the young couple next door trying to grow their first tomato patch, about Mrs. Jenkins down the road, who was once fined for growing native plants, about making sure what happened to him never happened to someone else. He said yes. By the time spring arrived, Caleb's farm had not only recovered, it had flourished. The orchard bloomed with a vengeance. The new irrigation lines ran with steady, efficient pressure. His barn had been repaired with the help of a few neighbors who now stopped by regularly, asking for advice, or just to share coffee under the shade of his pecan tree. The community was changing, not just on paper, but in spirit. One Saturday afternoon, the HOA hosted its first ever neighbors' picnic on the community green. It was Caleb's idea, potluck style. No rules about tablecloth colors. No formal speeches, just people. Someone even brought lemonade in a mason jar. And as kids played tag between folding chairs and dogs lounged in the grass, Caleb watched from under a pop-up tent, a slice of pecan pie in hand, and smiled. Not because he had won, but because he had reminded people of what mattered. Respect, truth, and that no one, not even someone with money, power, or koi fish, gets to steal without consequences. Later that night, as the stars blinked awake and the hum of the countryside returned, Caleb sat once again on his porch, listening to the rhythmic spray of the irrigation system kicking on. The land was healing. So was the neighborhood. And as he sipped the last of his coffee, He looked out across the field and whispered with a satisfied breath, "Let him try and steal from this land again." Because now, the farm didn't just have water. It had roots. It had a voice. And it had a community that would never be silenced again.